So hi everyone, I'm Zubin. This is Aparna, and we're from Mechanism Labs, which is a research lab, and we work on consensus and and questions of proof of stake. And randomness is something that is getting increasingly more popular as a very important part of proof of stake and the new algorithms that will allow for scalability in general. So why do we need a source of randomness, right? In life and in computing, randomness is a fundamental part of the universe. Quantum mechanics requires randomness. It's a fundamental part of quantum mechanics. But in computers, there's no such thing as true randomness. There's only pseudo-randomness, right? The ability to seem or be indistinguishable from a truly random distribution. And this comes up in a number of applications, from lotteries to gaming to probability. What are some, you should talk amongst yourself, what are some ways that you can think that randomness is used in computing, or maybe ways that you use randomness in your everyday life when you're using a computer? Like if you could talk to the people around you, and then in like 1 or 2 minutes I'll call on people that are excited about their use cases, or yeah.
It's like gaming, gambling. I guess like if they're talking about proof of stake, then like there's a block selection which gets to randomness in the consensus. Yeah, true.
No, I think for what sort of more in everyday life. So
I would say like how things are ranked, like if from like traditional websites and stuff, but then they probably actually want to do that based on some metric and not randomly.
Okay, so any particularly cool ideas, out of the box things maybe or conventional things in computing that require randomness? Yes, so public keys, right? So if you're determining, how to create an encryption system, you need randomness at every stage of the process, and then when you're actually choosing a public-private key pair, you need to do it in a random way, right? Any other applications of randomness in computing that you find interesting?
I can't remember the actual name, but there's like a round-robin kind of technique based on random, on selecting on load balancing, basically.
Okay, exactly, right. So, yeah.
maybe something completely less cryptocurrency. A crypto thing is generating random music track lists.
Exactly, and what's interesting about those is that when they were first created, they were considered too random, because if you have truly random choices, you might get the same song like 5 times in a row. So they actually make it less random when they're randomly choosing tracks when you're listening to iTunes or Spotify. So yeah, those are really interesting use cases. Of course, in cryptography, at every point you require randomness. When you're creating a cryptographic hash function, randomness is an important part of that. When you have like the one-time pad, which is a very standard encryption technique, you need to choose a key to encrypt your message. The key needs to be random. If the key is something that everyone knows, or it's a very standard number like 00000, then your key encryption technique is not secure. So cryptography requires randomness, but also consensus requires randomness, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If you have a consensus algorithm, you need to have some source of randomness if you want to escape some fundamental properties. For example, there's a famous theorem called the Flp Theorem that states that in asynchrony, or when the network model is such that messages may never get delivered to other participants, then you may never achieve consensus unless you have a source of randomness. And that's the one way, the backdoor out of the Flp theorem. In machine learning, randomness is also used in many places as well. So where is it used in decentralized protocols and blockchains? Oh no. Yeah. You can talk amongst each other again a little bit about this. Exactly.
It's used in lots of places in blockchains. Like, you can be really creative with this.
Yeah.
Then you like the random security.
Like for crypto keys, they have random numbers.
Yeah, well,
again, home by this, all the parameters, but
certain
random
things
number, so it could be unique.
also
Yeah.
also some
So like a unique identifier for each crypto key.
Identifier.
I'm not sure how they create those.
Yeah.
Okay, any cool randomness in blockchains or decentralized protocols? Nothing? There's no randomness?
Well, if you need to generate keepers, you're going to need some sort of randomness.
Exactly, right? If you want a public-private key pair, then you need randomness.
Or a leader election, randomly.
Yes. So leader election, randomness is an important part in many parts of leader election. Does anyone know where Bitcoin uses randomness? Or tries to at least attempt randomness?
The proof of work algorithm is
Exactly. Proof of work is a randomness, has randomness written to it all over. First, when you actually want to find your nonce in order to fulfill your proof of work, that is basically a completely random process. But also, proof of work is a leader election algorithm where it randomly selects one leader based on the probability, based on the hash power they have. So if someone has 20% of the hash power, because of this proof of work algorithm, there's a 20% likelihood they become the proposer in the next block. So proof of work is good. How about committee election and proof of stake, right? That or separating validators into different shards, right? There's a lot of places in proof of stake that you might require randomness, right? So if you want to choose a committee out of a larger validator set, how are you going to choose those committee nodes? How are you going to actually choose a leader for one round? Those are all places where randomness comes into play. So what are problems with centralized sources of randomness? Any?
Might not be random.
Exactly. What do you mean by that?
It might be gamed to forever who owns the central service, like a casino or something.
So it might be biasable. That's one big problem.
Or maybe if we know the algorithm, we can guess the next random number, let's say.
So if you're one of the centralized parties that's choosing randomness, you might be able to predict the next randomness seed. Yeah. What are some other problems?
You have to trust that it's random.
Exactly. So what's the point of a trusted protocol for blockchains? Doesn't make as much sense, right? Anything else? All right, let's go to. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So when we go to the next slide, I think it's going to be clear. I guess this is also a follow-up. If we do want a source of randomness, what are the properties that we want in that source of randomness? I guess you can talk amongst yourselves. There
are lots of
yeah, we've written down 6 things that we think are particularly important. I would love to hear what you guys think as well.
And this is like a decentralized randomness.
Yeah.
We just talked about how a centralized source is bad. So if you have multiple people coming together to create a source of randomness, what do you want from that?
It should not be predictable.
Okay.
It should be unpredictable. Then it's random.
Okay.
large sample set, I guess the set of your population is.
Yeah, a large sample set.
It must be stable against a Sybil attack. So no, it should be distinguished identities.
Yeah, so Sybil attack resistance or Sybil resistant in some way. You guys have actually so we have 6 things that we put down, and you guessed 2 or 3 of those already. So
Well, as long as there a certain proportion is honest, the output of the randomness should be fully random. So even if there some of the people who contribute to this randomness are malicious, they cannot manipulate it.
Yeah, so you could either say it's unbiasable or fault tolerant. Yeah.
You say same inputs should produce different outputs every time you involve.
Okay. Yeah. So the 6 that we put down, and all of your answers have been great. The first is unpredictable. We don't want any party, and this has been said, I think, multiple times. We don't want any party to be able to determine with any likelihood what exactly the randomness will look like, or what the output will be, what the distribution would be, greater than if they had no information at all. The next is we don't want it to be biasable. We don't want any party to be able to bias the outcome distribution or the outcome. And we also, this is interesting, if we want it to be in protocol, we want it for proof of stake, for example, to choose committees. We want the seed, the randomness seed, the source of randomness, not to be revealed before the current round, right? Because if you're choosing for example, a validator set or a leader, and you reveal the randomness seed that chooses the leader significantly before the round in which that leader starts actually proposing blocks, then you can, for example, DOS that node. So you don't want the seed to be revealed before the current round. And then someone said many nodes, so scalable. This is very important in blockchains when you might have hundreds or thousands of miners or validators that are coming together to produce randomness. So this, if it's not scalable, and many cryptographic practices for choosing randomness don't scale to thousands of nodes, then it can't necessarily work, or it might be centralized in a sense in a blockchain setting. And then available, and this is really important, right? So a lot of schemes for randomness, commit reveal schemes, for example, might require many participants to be online, to always be interacting with this protocol in order to continue creating randomness. And what we ideally want is a source of randomness that's going to continue no matter what. That it's never going to just halt and stop producing the next output because a few nodes are offline. And then publicly verifiable, and this is very important, which is an honest threshold of participants can prove or form a proof to a third party that randomness was created in an appropriate way. So I guess now randomness is used in many parts in the blockchain setting, whether it's by the protocol itself for proof of stake and or proof of work, or it can be used at the application layer. For example, for a lottery, that's one example where you would use randomness. Is there any ways that you see that it could be different, or the requirements of a randomness source might be different amongst these two use cases?
So yeah, we can write down the different properties here, and you can take a couple minutes to like think over it.
Wow.
And yeah. I hope they're not from
I doubt it.
okay.
Yeah,
they're
it's
not.
whiteboard, yeah.
So the first one was what?
It's
Unbiased. Scary.
Mhm.
So you might want to take a couple minutes and think of how you would rank these properties for blockchain protocols, and how you would rank these properties for like lottery applications. So which is the
Can we assume that the cryptography part is already random fine, or?
Well, I guess we're talking about how you create like cryptographic randomness in these protocols. So
yeah.
you can't assume that. Well, it depends what you mean by cryptography is already fine.
Okay, no. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what would be the most important property for like a lottery application source of randomness versus like what would be the most important property for a blockchain protocol? And there are like subtle nuances here.
And is this a protocol running on that blockchain?
No, it's the blockchain consensus protocol. Like proof of stake. If you're using some sort of randomness in proof of stake to select committee nodes, how does that source of randomness have to be different than the source of randomness that a lottery application running on top of this proof of stake
Right. Yeah.
protocol?
That's.
Because one of the key questions here would be if the lottery application needs to be real time, for instance. If it is not, if it doesn't have strong real time requirements, then scalability is not necessarily a big issue. Whereas let's say that unbias is pretty high for any of these. Can't really read the others. But
Unbiasable, unpredictable, available, publicly verifiable, a seed revealed only at the current round, and scalable. Yeah.
yeah, so if you're gonna have basically a lot of iterative rounds of random number selection, then scalable becomes a primary requirement.
Yeah. Scalable and available, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else have any thoughts on how you rank it?
Well, it doesn't the lottery application inherit a lot of the properties from the blockchain that's running on?
Yeah, it does. So the lottery application can use the randomness source derived from the blockchain protocol itself, but it might have slightly different requirements. Yeah. So like if you're building a lottery application and you have 5 different proof of stake protocols, which one do you choose? Yeah.
This unbiasable, maybe the question is also like how expensive it is to influence something. So if I just win a free t-shirt, then maybe it's not, I don't care so much. Somebody spends can influence it with €1,000.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, that's one of the things we were thinking about. So you want in a lottery application, you want it to be more expensive to bias the protocol than the amount of winnings that you could get from biasing it, right? And so that's like some economic guarantee, for example, of unbiasability is one way to think about it in a lottery setting. Yeah. Any other?
The lottery application, the protocol should be like more predictable. Random number, let's say, any game, I need to like it should be more predictable. Means the total set of the numbers should be smaller than the set in blockchain application.
This guy. Load.
So in short, the probability of guessing the random number in lottery application will be higher than the probability in blockchain protocol.
Perhaps that might work. I mean, you can take a long string and shorten it down as well. You can like hash a long random string, so you can get less randomness with larger amounts of randomness. But that's
I would say unpredictability is probably the most important for a lottery application. While maybe for a blockchain protocol, if you can predict somehow the next round, maybe it's not such a big deal because you don't have time to attack the node generating the. But in a lottery, if you can predict the next winner, then it's done, right? It's not a lottery.
exactly. So unpredictable. This is an example, right? In if you want a lottery application, you want a protocol that is completely unpredictable. One that will give you randomness and reveal that seed like many rounds ahead of time. Probably not an appropriate source of randomness for a lottery application. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, not sure if it was mentioned, but publicly verifiable is also very important for lotteries for kind of the same reason. If you're having many rounds of selecting a particular leader and you can really verify why one particular node was chosen out of 1,000 times, then that's not a gigantic problem.
Yeah.
But if you have a single major result with a significant payout, then it is.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good example as well. Public verifiability is like one of the most important things for a lottery. Yeah.
Does availability make any sense for the protocol? Because
Yeah.
it's running on the protocol.
Yeah. So the way like I thought of this was, for a protocol itself, it doesn't matter if it's completely unbiasable because law of large numbers kind of comes into play, and if you have like a large number of validators that are coming together to create this source of randomness, and you have multiple rounds, it kind of evens out. Even if you have like a slight bit of bias, you can probably tolerate it. But so a protocol can be a little bit unbiased, like a little bit biasable and a little bit predictable. But like your randomness source for the protocol should not be the reason that your protocol dies. So I like to think of it as like a randomness source for a blockchain protocol should be highly available. Which means even if like one small minority of people abort the protocol, there should still be some output to ensure your protocol can keep going. The seed not being revealed before the count round is also kind of an important property for the protocol. For the lottery, not to the same extent. And I think the most important property for a lottery is basically that it is unbiasable and unpredictable in every way. Like it should be completely like as expensive as possible to bias it. Yeah.
Oh, to bias it, wouldn't you have to bias the underlying protocol itself?
Yeah. So it should be like extremely expensive to bias a lottery application. It's
Yeah.
random.
So it's like when you build a lottery application, you should build it on top of a protocol that is like extremely unpredictable and unbiasable.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can have like a underlying protocol which uses some sort of randomness, and then you can use some method on top of that randomness source to create an additional source of randomness for your lottery. So it's not like completely reliant on the underlying protocol.
Yeah. So how does randomness tie into other things that we need to think about when we're creating a protocol? For example, synchrony. Does everyone here know what like network synchrony means? Or should I explain that? Okay, let me go over that one time. So essentially, when you're creating a protocol, you need to think about what infrastructure it runs on, right? If it runs on the internet, for example, it may not be that, when one party sends a message in the protocol, it may take infinitely long to reach another party. It may never reach another party, right? But if you're using some kind of like permissioned network where there's like extremely good connection between every party in this network, it might take a specific amount of time for messages to reach between parties. And so this is called the Synchrony Model, and when there's a fixed amount of time between communications, that's called full synchrony or synchrony. And when you have this model where messages may never reach the other intended recipients, that's called asynchrony. So how does randomness tie into synchrony? And then the adversarial model is like when we're thinking of making secure protocols, we need to consider them secure in the presence of a certain adversary. And that's called the adversarial model. So how does randomness tie into these two important properties of protocols?
Take a minute, talk to your neighbor,
Yeah.
and think about it.
I guess the first one depends pretty much on the protocol itself that's used, so we talked about it.
Quiet.
The first one is
Maybe
if you're in the internet, you can express and there's no like
there's like less,
or conditions to generate
if it's less synchrony,
be the input for
Mm.
your randomness.
Yeah.
it's this idea of it not being revealed
Yeah.
until
By nature, everyone
until
is going to be
the round is
different.
being concluded. It's going to be harder to achieve.
To take like initial conditions.
Yeah.
I think there's
So you want to have the same
general idea that randomness
Randomness in a semi-synchronous model.
we shouldn't rely on
Yeah, so semi-synchronous basically assumes that the message passing might not be like an exact upper bound, but might be an upper bound based on some probability ramp, like some kind of random variable.
big O from the n square, where n is actually number of nodes. So if you want to like get the synchrony, you have n nodes, and you actually need to connect each node with each other, which actually means n square number of connections, which is like a lot. So we don't need to rely on that. In case of synchrony, like any randomness protocol should not rely on synchrony. That's usually bad idea. Also, that's why it's like for those instances like Definity, they try to generate the local random beacon. Everyone generates it, and only the set of beacons that requires special parameters for this round gets to be chosen as a minors, as a local users. But it's like the generation part itself. It's done locally, like on each host. Nobody tries to run some kind of interaction protocol to generate it. Everybody generates it like locally.
Any ideas on how these are related concepts?
An adversary can censor transactions.
Sorry?
Well, it might if you have a synchronous network,
Yeah.
then you don't know whether transactions have been censored or not.
Okay.
Whereas in synchronous network, it will just fail in consensus.
Yeah, so that's...
So like if your adversary is powerful enough to censor transactions for like some reason, then it is a strong factor in an asynchronous model to like against achieving randomness, publicly verified randomness.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting idea. So essentially, in asynchrony, what you have is you don't know how long messages are going to take to pass around the network. So you can't really distinguish between someone who sent a message and then it's just waiting, you're waiting for it in transmission, and someone who sent a message and an adversary came and censored that message, right? And so maybe if you need a scalable randomness source where there's a lot of participants required for randomness, then in asynchronous model this might be more difficult to determine if an adversary is getting in the way of this or there's just some problems with availability. That's an interesting thought. Any other ideas? Any thoughts? I heard a lot of discussion, so that sounded good. Yeah.
Maybe regarding the adversary, it's somehow the question is, does the adversary have some access or knowledge about the random bits that different participants generate and
Yeah, so
can react to it, or is he completely oblivious of this this randomness?
Yeah. So that's another good question, right? So if we're saying that randomness is unpredictable, it's unpredictable to whom, right? And can an adversary who's computationally unbounded or has an extremely high amount of computational power, can they predict the randomness, right? In proof of work, for example, if you have a computationally infinite adversary, they can predict the bits of the nonce better than anyone else, and they can bias the randomness, or they could predict other people's nonces as well. So that's a really interesting idea, and that's very valid. Any other thoughts on this? No? Okay. So if we remember, like, the seed being revealed only at the start of the round, that's a really interesting idea, because if you have a synchronous network model, then the seed to be revealed before the start of the round, it's probably revealed at the at the beginning of the previous round, the synchronous round. Another way to say this is that if we're having a synchronous model, there's discrete rounds that might take like 5 seconds per round. And if we're choosing a different leader in every round, then this leader must be chosen by this randomness source, and therefore this randomness source must itself be synchronous. So Dfinity is a really good example of this. It's a synchronous protocol where every single round you have this random beacon that's chosen, and that chooses the leader or the committee and the leader of the next round. And so you kind of need this randomness source to enter its next round for the next round of consensus to start. So it's like the synchronous model is very, very much intertwined with the randomness model in such a setting. And then in terms of adversarial model, for example, unpredictable, unbiasable, these are really important notions that are very different depending on if your adversary controls 51% of nodes or your adversary controls 1% of nodes, or whether your adversary is computationally polynomially bounded or unbounded, for example. So these are like, yeah.
Yeah, a couple other things. With respect to randomness and your adversarial model, if the randomness source is revealed before the start of the current round, it basically affects how adaptive the adversary is. So adaptive basically means how long does it take for an adversary to like cause their malicious action to happen. And if the seed is revealed before the current round, then it can give the adversary like that time delay to act and maybe DOS other people, maybe attack other people in the network. So whatever that time is gives the adversary an advantage. Another thing with regard to network synchrony is basically if you have multiple people coming together to create this sort of randomness source, do they all have to be like, are they all like making commitments at the same time, and is the reveal like within a specific period of time? If this whole randomness generation protocol itself is in synchrony, then your consensus protocol can only at the best be synchronous. If you can generate randomness and asynchrony, then you can do even better. You can probably do asynchrony or partial synchrony for your consensus protocol. Yeah. Okay, so this section is going to be an application of all the theory that we've learned so far, where you basically get to determine and analyze different randomness protocols. So we're going to look at 5 to 6 different protocols, and you guys are going to tell me how they do in terms of being biasable, predictable, and the seed revealed before current round. If we have additional time, we can talk about other stuff. So if you have your laptops or something, pull them out. The way this is going to work is at a very high level, I'll explain the protocol, and then I will either like link you to something that gives you more in-depth representation of the algorithm, and then you guys get to talk with your neighbor and think about how you would bias this algorithm, or how you would go about predicting this algorithm, or attacking it. So the first to start off is your very easy deterministic algorithm. So Tendermint uses a deterministic round-robin protocol to select its set of validators. And it basically uses some heap sort kind of technique. So the general idea is at a given round, different people who want to be validators stake in. And now based on the proportion of stake, there is this deterministic algorithm which predicts, which basically says who's going to be the validator for the next set of rounds, until the next stake-in cycle happens. So there's more details on the exact algorithm there if you want, but think about how you would go about predicting it, biasing it, or attacking it. And we'll circle back in like 3 to 4 minutes. anyone having any trouble? Does anyone have any thoughts?
This seems biased
Mhm.
because the one with more voting power will select the next
That's my fault.
and
No, just put it down there. Yeah, no, it happens in real estate.
What about, those are both correct. If you had to be someone who is staking in or staking out, you could basically like stake a large amount in and then bias the
biased.
outcome.
Yeah.
What about, is the seed revealed before the current round?
It is possible
Mm-hmm. Why?
because for the one who is having highest power,
Okay.
he can just like make it.
So, because it's deterministic, you know way ahead of time who is basically the proposer for the next round. You probably know like 20 rounds ahead of who the proposers are. So the randomness source is definitely revealed like way before the start of the new round. Is everyone getting a sort of intuition for what I mean by these three properties? Yeah? Okay. So, deterministic was an easy one to get you guys warmed up. Let's look at some of the harder ones. So, verifiable random functions is something that Algorand uses and Ouroboros uses in their validator selection or committee selection. So the way they go about this is they first have this process called a cryptographic sortition, which basically gives every single person who's in the committee set like a rank. And based off of this rank, like everyone can propose a block. There can be a case where multiple people have the same rank. But the general idea is like everyone can go around, propose a block, and then if you are in the committee, you listen to all the blocks that you get, and you only like accept the block that was proposed by the person with the highest rank that you see. So that's the whole cryptographic sortition idea. And in order to like not reveal whether you're in the proposer committee or not ahead of time, they use something called the VRF to kind of hide that they're in the committee until like the start of when you see the proof. So here's slightly more details on how that works. Think about if it's predictable, biasable, and yeah. And we'll circle back in a couple.
It's predictable because it's using the previous set.
Mm-hmm. biasable.
Well, if you know what the committees are, you can change network traffic to them to make sure that they're not getting to them.
And is the seed revealed before the count round?
Yeah.
So actually, in VRFs, the seed, this is like the one advantage of it, that the seed itself is never revealed before the current round because you're giving this proof that you're in the committee, and only once you propose the block can someone like look at your message in the block and realize, oh, here's a proof that you were in the committee. I guess now I accept it. But because like once you've made this block, you no longer have to send any more messages. It's kind of like your proof that you were in the round is the same as your block that you sent out. So the seed is like never really revealed before the start of the new round. And that's the really interesting thing about VRFs, which is the reason both Ouroboros and Algorand use them. And one huge advantage that using a VRF gives you is because the seed is never revealed, no one can ever predict who the validators are ahead of time and DOS them in any sense. And this kind of ties back to like how permission or permissionless your blockchain can be, or like decentralized the blockchain can be. Like if you go with the Tendermint approach and you put the responsibility on validators to secure themselves, that is one way of going about it, which means only people who are capable of like building these validators can be part of your validator set. On the flip side, you can take the VRF approach and anyone can be a validator. They don't necessarily need any technical skills to prevent themselves from getting DOSed. So that was another hard one, but this is a fun one, Randao. So the general idea with this is you sort of make a commitment for a few rounds in advance. So you take a hash of a commitment and hash it like a bunch of times, and then you send that out to the world. And every round you sort of like peel the layer of hash and reveal the pre-image to the previous hash. So here's a more detailed example of what that looks like. Think about if it's predictable, biasable, or the seed's revealed before the current round.
So it's to some extent biasable because I have this option to abort, so I can not reveal the pre-image. And if I don't like the outcome somehow.
That's a very good point. Now, in any of the cases that we saw before, was that an option? Like abort and not create an output? No. So what's the difference between, like, would you use Randao for a consensus protocol, or does it seem like more suited for a lottery application?
If all the validators decide to abort, then means there will be no new block creation. Maybe that can be the case. Means how random validators are selected or geographically located, or it is a group of validators.
So the caveat with Randao is like if even one person aborts, there's no seed created for that round, and that person gets economically penalized. So the high level idea is like everyone puts in some amount of like economic stake, and then they put in the stake with their commitment, and if they don't reveal, they get slashed. But then it ties into the question of what is this economic penalty, and how does that tie into fairness of like everyone else revealing? Does everyone else get back money for like this person not revealing and aborting the protocol? So this one is again, yeah.
A question relating like to rundown to the previous one. So in this algorithm, can a block proposer could also just not send the block, which so doesn't this also to some extent bias?
That is correct, except in Algorand, because it's not a block proposer, everyone is given a rank, and anyone can propose a block. It's just you as a listener accept the block from the proposer who has the highest rank. So if a proposer doesn't propose, that's still okay because the likelihood of everyone not proposing is very low.
Yeah.
But couldn't I do the same thing with rundown?
So the way RunDAO works is like everyone has to reveal their commitment, and then you take the XOR off all those revealed things which everyone puts out. So if even one person aborts the reveal stage, then you can't really like XOR everyone else's thing. Instead, you choose to slash this person. Yeah.
But you said there will be penalty for that person who is going to abort.
Yeah, there will be penalty in terms of whatever they staked in.
So then, why the person will abort? Like, what will be the reason of aborting? If he's going to get penalized.
Well, think of how much the penalty costs, right? Like, if it's $1, and I could abort like $1 million lottery by just like paying $1, is that not good enough of a reason for me to do that?
Again, it's not good algorithm for this consensus.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good algorithm. Yeah.
But don't we compare like this previous algorithm doesn't do like something different, like because it's used for the block proposal, it's not like everybody participates and at the end I have like one random output, and which is like how this algorithm is described here. And in the verifiable random function case, it's already like how you described it, it's like closely tied in with the consensus protocol. It's not like everybody has an input and at the end we have one random output.
Yeah.
So like I don't completely understand the comparison that you're making.
Okay, so in that case, like, so the difference is in that everyone chooses their own randomness source, and then based on the previous round's randomness, you determine whose randomness source you're going to go with. Versus here, everyone puts together their randomness source to create the randomness for the next round. Do you see the slight difference? So what I mean by that is like in the previous case, in VRFs, you're basically like each person can choose what's going to be the randomness for the next round, and with some probability, if it just so happens that they are the person with the highest rank, their randomness source becomes the randomness source for the next round.
Okay, and that's kind of the output of the common random output. Okay.
Exactly. Does that make it more clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then I would say that you can bias it by not proposing a block, because then you're kind of saying that you don't want your output to become the random result of the current round. So also the VRF you can bias it, same as this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one difference is that you don't. Here you know that you're going to change the output. In the VRF case, you don't know, right? Because you don't know that you're the highest proposer. You don't know ahead of time. Someone else might have a higher rank. And you don't know who the second highest, or if you are the highest, you don't know who the second highest proposer is, right? You don't know.
This is some synchrony assumption on the network, so maybe I
already received some blocks and I see,
Yeah.
okay, this is the second highest. I like this one better, and that's when I abort.
Yeah.
Well, so
So-
that's a possibility. If you're like towards the end of a round, based on
Yeah.
the synchrony assumption of the network, that might be true. But at the same time, that I guess that's valid. But given the synchrony assumptions of Algorand, if you essentially if you abort, if you decide not to propose a block, you don't know that it affected any part of the randomness because you don't know that you were the highest proposer and you don't know who the second highest proposer is or what their rank is. But you're right. Maybe you've been able to determine that based on like the network, but that's like, I guess, violates the assumptions of the protocol. But that's very valid, I think.
And the other thing is, with that, it's still like a slight bias, not a huge bias. What I mean by that is like, the probability of like you waiting till the end and then hearing everyone else's and not proposing your block means, also comes with like two other issues, which is one, you won't get a reward if you didn't propose a block. And two, like, even if you don't propose, the second highest person proposed, the round will still continue. Because as long as there is a block proposal, everyone else will work out of what is the highest rank that they have seen, which will be the second highest block proposer. So unless like you can get everyone to not propose, it'll still continue. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's look at Snow White. Actually, because we have just a few more minutes, I want to do like a different thought exercise. And then if we have time, we'll come back to this. So the idea with the next two exercises is I'll give you a high level idea of like a tool that you have, and you have to come out with how you would use that to create a randomness scheme. Are you guys game for that? Yeah. Okay. So how many of you have heard of VDFs? Okay. So think of VDFs as this time lock function into which you can put an input and you will get an output after like whatever specified time that the VDF takes to operate. So no one knows what the output is until that period of time has passed. So it's like a function that takes like maybe 1 hour to finish computing. So how would you use this tool in your toolkit to create a decentralized randomness scheme? Feel free to talk to your neighbors, think.
The result of a certain period of time. And that start time is fixed when you start learning.
Yeah, so right, you can a time, say 1 hour or something. And you can know anything before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably better to put it into actually random dimension on top afterwards because you don't really know if you're verifying the video function. Good for
Does anyone have any thoughts you'd like to share or ideas? Anyone have any ideas? I can give you some hints. Think of Randall. You can essentially modify Randall if you have this. So what was the problem with Randall? The fact that someone could abort the protocol, correct? by not revealing. So what if your commit itself was a function that revealed itself in an hour? If everyone had to make a commit that revealed itself in an hour, is there any way that someone can like not reveal? So if say everyone in this room made a commit, each of you to your own value using this VDF function, and then at the end of 1 hour, all your outputs are taken and XORed together, and that is used as a source of randomness, would that be biasable in any way?
That would be very practical.
Yeah. Well, it's a different thing. It's not very practical, but it's not biasable. Because if someone had to bias it, they would have to like compute stuff for 1 hour to like figure it out. But it might be practical for something like a lottery system where you absolutely don't want the output to be biased, and if you have like $1 million writing on it, you can have like a group of people come in and commit using a VDF, and like at the end of the day, you like reveal the output and then choose one winner. So that's like a very interesting like, toolkit. Did you guys come out with any other different constructions of it? Okay. I have another like interesting exercise. So would you guys like to do another one of construct your own randomness or analyze randomness? Which one?
Extractor.
Okay. So imagine you have Bitcoin blocks or Bitcoin's functioning. How would you use an extractor? So an extractor is basically a function that takes in some amount of randomness and creates more entropy out of it. So assuming your Bitcoin its blocks are some amount of random, you can put it into an extractor and immediately get out a source of randomness. Now, how would you go about creating a randomness source with an extractor? One caveat to keep in mind is that if you just pass in the block into the extractor, it's you can do state grinding attacks on it, which basically means someone can pass in different blocks until they like what the output is. So how would you defend against that?
Sequences.
What do you mean by that?
Sequences of blocks.
That's one idea. Do you want to elaborate what you mean by that?
Well, it's harder to construct a sequence of blocks than just pick one that makes any. So to find an output that matches a sequence of blocks would be more challenging.
Do you guys have any other ideas on how you could do it? Yeah.
I mean, the difficulty of the Bitcoin blocks in regular intervals, it's like higher than required, actually. So you could have like, because they want like a block with a very high difficulty, and just say the first one that gets accepted into the Bitcoin blockchain with a certain difficulty.
Yeah. So another neat trick you can do is pass in the block concatenated with the hash of the block, and because it's going to take you forever to calculate the reverse, you've basically created like a nice extractor out of that. So if you're wondering how that works, think about it. Our chat with me after. But yeah, that's the workshop. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any other questions, we can talk outside after. You can also connect with us on Twitter, on our GitHub, or on